BizBuzz on Marla FM 97.5.
And a very good afternoon and welcome to the BizBuzz program. This is Dermot Fitzpatrick joining me today, also with my co-presenter, Wisdom DaCosta, and looking forward to being with you for the next 90 minutes with some conversations around business issues. Particularly today, we're focusing on tax issues, aspects of tax, and perhaps we're going to cover on pensions and things like inheritance tax. And we're going to be playing some great music in the meantime. Wisdom, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dermot. Good afternoon, listeners.
What have you been doing during the day today?
Today, preparing for this show, looking for some great information, some news, a little bit of controversy, and hopefully some tax help, which will help listeners, whether they're businessmen or employees.
Well, I was just looking at some of the headings we were looking at. It's about the up-and-coming election, but we're not going to go deeply into conversations about the elections. But there's a point about the coalition's corporate tax reforms raising less than Labour's. Do you want to just say something about that?
Yeah, it was a study analysis done by the FT, which suggests that George Osborne has raised much less income than past Labour government, whose reforms were aimed at tackling corporate tax avoidance. So in their 13 years, it seems that in power, that the counter corporate tax avoidance is projected to raise 10 times more than what is projected to be raised by George Osborne's reforms. The concern is that the issues that he's trying to talk about are corporate tax avoidance. So, but that's been watered down because the easing of laws aimed at stopping companies using tax havens, that's been watered down because of other attractions to business coming to the UK. Ian Young from the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, to put it bluntly, seems to be concerned that George Osborne is using political spin to dupe voters.
So that's what he said.
Well, that's not what he said. That's my paraphrase. I think he was much more polite than I was.
Yeah, there's always been that aspect of how companies and corporate businesses, can't handle their tax effectively, as they say, and abusing all the means of the law to pay as little tax as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if things are in law, you can use them. But a question now, which I suppose many people are facing, is it moral? Is it ethical? Should they be doing that in a time when the country really needs the tax money to help pay for services?
And there are a lot of big companies, aren't there? We won't mention any names, but there are a lot of big companies who make a lot of money in this country, but because of their tax circumstances, they don't pay very much tax.
Yeah, there are lots of ways they can do that.
I mean, how did they do that? Just give me an idea.
Well, one way is transfer pricing. So a company, if it's got an operation in a number of different countries, supposing it's got a low cost base in one country, what it can do is transfer goods from one country to another. Mm-hmm. So perhaps the coffee beans, should I say that, are grown in one country.
Don't mention the name of a country.
And then sent to another country for grinding. And then from that country, the ground coffee beans go to another country to be sold. If you imagine that the difference between the cost of growing those beans, buying those beans in country 1, and the cost of selling that cup of coffee in country 3, the difference is the profit. So that profit, well, you can shift which country it's taxed in by setting the price that you pay in country 1. So if country 1 has the lowest tax rate, clearly you want that to make the biggest profit, and maybe the selling price from country 1 to country 2, or country 2 to country 3, results in a loss in the UK, so no tax.
So the shareholders, I mean, from a shareholder perspective, that would be sound business practice if you can do that. But I guess if you're in the country, you're living in the country, you're using the facilities of the country, then there's, as you say, there's a moral aspect of tax.
I think the consumer would not use the word sound, but perhaps use the word sharp. So it's sharp practice, of course, but legal.
And despite the fact actually that people know about, there are certain companies who have been doing that, they still tend to use them. They don't seem to be their business. There doesn't seem to be a boycott of beverage outlets.
Well, there have been over the years, haven't there? Certainly at least one big company has been boycotted. But you're right, maintaining that pressure when you've in your own life, when you've got so much else to deal with, it might be difficult.
Yeah, there was a pharmaceutical company I heard that they make the product here. I think you were just explaining what they make the product here and then they sell it to Switzerland for a small amount of money.
Yep.
and then they repackage it or something and re-import it back into this country at a huge cost.
Yeah,
and that's how they make the money. And of course, they don't pay the tax in this country because they've only earned pennies on the product.
Yeah, I think what you've just pointed out is perhaps setting in place an artificial step, or what could be regarded as an artificial step. Although I'm sure that the corporates will find ways of justifying it.
Well, time for some music. Let's look at what we're going to do here. We're going to play Budapest. Yeah, let's play some Budapest. George Ezra. Yeah, we were talking just during the break there about this guy in Budapest, who is in comparison to people who are just trying to make money and not even wanting to contribute to the upkeep of the countries that they're working and living in. This guy was converting waste matter into saleable products. Have you got that one up?
Yes, I have. Yes, this young man called Tom Zaki, and if you're from Hungary, my apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly, grew up in Hungary and then moved to Canada. So he's really looking to make money whilst helping people. So his work was to take waste and turn it into products which were useful, and he used his experience in both Hungary and in what was from a communist background and coming to the UK. So he calls his if you like, his approach a fusion of capitalism and communism. So a young entrepreneur, 33, started his company 12 years ago in the US, and it was launched in the UK in 2009. And he's already prevented 2.5 billion pieces of waste from going to landfill. That's pretty amazing. If you imagine that anything that goes into a landfill site sits there for potentially hundreds of years doing nothing.
Isn't it great? Somebody that actually comes up with an idea like that says, okay, I'm going to convert something that is so, put it into landfill. I'm going to make something really useful out of it. Yep. Is it a successful company? Is he making some money?
It is now. He started off, as I said, he actually went to school in Canada, then he went to university in Princeton, but he dropped out of university. So a bit like Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard. He wanted to start up this waste company. His parents clearly were not happy. Why would you want to drop out of Princeton? But he was convinced that what he was doing was right. He wanted to help the world and make money. So what he started doing was really taking waste and convert it into products. Stuff that was really difficult to recycle. So cigarette stubs and coffee capsules and biscuit wrappers. And he tried to find ways of actually making them useful. Generally, you have to grind them down and turn them into another product. And move on from there. So let's see what else he's done. So the way he's really tried to work is to get in contracts with some big manufacturers, big companies, so he can resell some of his products onto them. So he does business with people like McVitie's, Johnson & Johnson and Kenco now.
And would you think he pays tax?
I think in the first 5 years he didn't pay tax because the company was making a loss, and then he had a bit of an epiphany, and he said, "Okay, it's all very well to do good for the world, but hey, I've got to earn the crust and make a living." So at that point, he changed his model to try and make money out of it as well.
And I bet he does. I bet he does makes money, and I bet he pays his taxes too.
Yeah, his first product, listen to this, his company's called TerraCycle, and he made organic fertilizer created from worm poo. Yeah, and within 5 years, the firm had sales of $3 million to $4 million, but it was making a loss. So at that point, he had to sort of come up and change the way he did things. But here's an interesting one as well. Nowadays, that they take cigarette stubs and turn them into plastic pallets.
Gosh.
I have no idea how.
I have no idea how, but it's just the quantum leap from here's a cigarette butt and here's a pallet, a plastic pallet. How do you do that? And it's just somebody who actually decides, yes, it's going to happen. This is what we're going to make out of it. And what's the need? People need pallets. People need plastic pallets instead of the wooden pallets, perhaps. And here we've got all these cigarette butts.
It's certainly really interesting that he's taken his experiences, but some of them negative from his background, and taken this fusion and fused capitalism and communism, as he calls it. And those experiences have driven him his ideas and pushed him forward. First 5 years making a loss. Well, wouldn't you have given up after 1 or 2 years? So he's persisted. So lots of great stories there for young entrepreneurs out there. Keep going, keep believing, keep trying.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And Wisdom, we were looking at this pension, this changes in the pensions system and the concerns over the pension reforms. Do you have something to say about that one?
Yeah, I suppose it sort of takes the point that Ian Young from the Institute of Chartered Accountants was making, that perhaps at this time there may be a little bit of political dogma driving some of the things that the Chancellor is saying. So last year, in March last year, the UK Chancellor stunned the pensions industry by promising to end the rules that have in effect herded millions of retirees into irreversible annuity contracts. So you put your money into a pension fund, and it comes towards retirement, and you have to buy basically a contract from the fund which pays you a pension every year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Chancellor said last year, perhaps it was electioneering, I don't know. But he said that from April this year, you don't have to do that. If you're 55 or over, I think there was a talk of a Ferrari. You can take your pension, you can cash it in and use some of the money to buy whatever you want. But I suppose pension watchers have noticed signs of alarm and panic in the government. The changes are happening in April, but there's an unexpected announcement by the pension regulators that at the end of January that they're going to bypass the usual process and they're going to rush through some new consumer safeguards for the pension market in time for April. So they're bypassing the normal process and not giving pension companies enough time to put these regulations, which haven't even been published yet, into place. And it gets worse.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right. And it gets worse because I believe that the government also promised a pensions helpline to help people in this situation deal with the complicated questions. Well, what do you do with your money? What are your personal circumstances? But they've now admitted that helpline won't even be manned by pension experts.
Okay. It'll be manned by...
They haven't said.
Right.
But if anybody wants a job out there, give George Osborne a call, perhaps.
And how many people will they have manning these? It seems like, well, how does that happen? That something as fundamental as this, as kind of profound as this it changes the whole concept, because people put their money into pension funds and then they get paid out over a period of years so that they'll always have something. Does it stand? Am I wrong in thinking that if people kind of are able to take all of the money out, that Ferraris and things would...
Not all of their money out, but certainly a proportion of their money out, a greater proportion of their money, but they don't have to be tied to the same pension company. They can take that money and invest it in a different company to provide this annuity contract, which takes the pot and gives them a guaranteed income for a period of over a number of years.
Because it's that annuity that was causing the problem, I think. Sometimes the annuity wasn't actually giving the return.
I think
you have to live an awful long time in order to get the money back that you paid into it in the first place.
I think the concern was that if you were tied to a pension fund that gave you the annuity in the first place, that you saved up with, that they might be able to give you rates which weren't quite market rates.
Mm. And of course, nobody's an expert. No, the ordinary person is not an expert in that. So you go to an advisor and you say, help me find the best annuity for this fund.
Well, that would be the normal process. I think that this has been hit by a couple of areas. I know the IFAs have now got so many more regulations governing them that they now actually have to charge a fee for every time you go and visit them. And that means that hundreds of thousands of IFAs have just disappeared. And the IFAs that are left...
IFA is International Independent Financial Advisor.
Yeah. Effectively, because the only people who can afford to pay for them now are people who are wealthier. So ordinary people like you and I'm making an assumption about you, Dermot, perhaps incorrectly there. Sorry about that.
I'm just an ordinary guy. Just an ordinary
like me. We can't afford to pay the £50, £100, £200 an hour to bring in an IFA. So that pension advice has sort of disappeared for the ordinary person. So perhaps this is why the government, aware that their regulation has had this effect, perhaps this is why the government has said, well, we'll give you a free 45 minutes guidance session with one of our advisors who won't be qualified.
Right.
So, worry.
It sounds like it's if it's going to be fun.
It sounded like a good idea at the time.
I wonder why. Let's play some Eurythmics. Why? I don't know why. let's play some Eurythmics, or one of my favorite singers of all time, Annie Lennox, with Why. We were just listening to some of the words on on that song, This Boat is Sinking. We were smiling to ourselves here. If you just joined us, this is Dermot Fitzpatrick with you on the BizBuzz programme, with you until 3:30, together with my co-presenter this afternoon, Wisdom Da Costa. And the themes that we've talked about this afternoon have been about corporate tax and we're moving on now to talking about individual tax, of which I know that Wisdom, you have a lot of expertise in. What are the key issues that people should be considering is coming up to end of tax time, tax year? What are the things that people need to be taking into consideration?
I suppose there's a report about hundreds of thousands, but nearly 1 million people face £100 fine. So let's look at how can you stop yourself getting fined for submitting your self-assessment return late. There is two lots of fines, so just to watch out that if you submit your tax return late, even by a day, you get a £100 penalty. Now, there's a sliding tariff, so that if you go up to 12 months without submitting your tax return online, you could pay a penalty of up to £1,600, or at least £1,600. Or
what would you have to do to incur a penalty like that?
All right. So first thing is that if you are 1 day late, you have a £100 penalty.
Oh, that's automatic.
Automatic.
Right.
And then after 3 months, then you start to get a penalty of £10 per day, which is up to £900. So between 3 and 6 months, you could get a further £900 penalty. So after 3 months, if you haven't submitted your tax return, you could have a £1,000 penalty. Then after 6 months, this goes up even more to another £300. And then, if you're 12 months or more late, actually, HMRC will start getting quite serious with you. If they think you're deliberately holding back information, then you could double your tax bill or have another £300 fine. So these are all cumulative.
Gosh.
So how can you get around it? Oh, by the way, if it's not just getting your tax return in late, it's also paying late. If you pay late, you have to pay interest, and it's usually up to 5% of the tax due. So what can you do? Well, one way you can do it, here's a useful piece of information, is put in a draft tax return. Submit your tax return, because you can amend it later on once you've got more accurate information. So at least that stops the late filing penalties, which, as I said, could be at least £1,600 or up to £1,600 or 100% of your tax bill.
So better to get one in, get it in, even if it's not.
And that's certainly what I would recommend my clients, and what I do for my clients. Let's get something in which is more or less right, and then we'll fine-tune it later on. So that's the first thing. So if you've got your tax return in, that's great. But how else can you sort of save money? What sort of things can you claim for which may help you save tax in the future? Well, there are a few things, especially if you're an employee. Don't forget to claim, especially if you're paying tax at 40% or more, claim for your payments to charity. So any donations you make to, for example, your school, or to your fund, or charities like that, where you sign a gift aid declaration. Make a note of that. Take a note of how much you're paying in the tax year for both gift aid donations and also pensions. So I'm not talking about pensions where your employer deducts it from your payroll before he pays it to you. But if, for example, you're paying a certain company in addition to what perhaps your employer takes away from you. So make sure you note on your tax return, or if you don't have a tax return, obviously you can send in a letter to HMRC or use a P87 claim form. So tell them about what you're paying out as a gift aid donation or payments to pension funds.
So there are people who are self-employed and need to complete a tax return for their business, for their self-employed business, and there are also people who are in full employment where the tax is deducted at source, but they still can actually save some tax. Is that what we're saying?
Absolutely. Here's a big bugbear of mine, which is why I wrote a book about it. It's really to do with the fact that people assume that the payroll system, PAYE, is correct. It just isn't. The PAYE system, the payroll system, is designed to take your money. It's not designed to give you allowances at all. So you can claim allowances as an employee, and also other things like gift aid and pension payments, but you have to claim that separately. So if you think your employer's got your tax right, you're wrong.
So because they only have the tax that is due on the income that they're aware of, and the the tax deductible expenses that they're aware of. But you may have other things yourself, as you say, with charity donations to charity and things like that.
Yeah, employers have a tough gig. Not only do they have to operate a system which takes withholds tax, is the official expression, withholds tax money from their employees, but they have to pay the privilege of another 13% national insurance on top of that, just for the privilege of employing their employees. So lots of sympathy for employers. They can only do what the government tells them to do, but the government doesn't tell them to get the employees' tax right, just to pay them the money as soon as possible. So what can you claim for? Well, I won't mention the book again, but there are lots of things, and at least 21 allowances that you can claim for, and there are for 250 professions who can claim guaranteed allowances for things like workwear, specialist clothing or tools. What else can you do?
What about transport?
Transport is one of them. If you use your own vehicle on business journeys.
So not going to and from work, but going from home to... Yeah. If you happen to have a work where you travel to a client from home and you're using your own car, but it's not a company car.
Correct. If you're using your own vehicle, it doesn't have to be a car. It could be a bicycle. It could be a van. It could even be a motorbike. And you can actually claim allowances for that. But you're right. It's not commuting going from your normal home to your normal place of work. It's journeys on business other than to your normal place.
And public transport as well, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's for a client.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's lots of things else you can claim for. I mean, one another interesting thing you can do is if you've got interest from lots of different accounts and there are two of you and your partner, and there are joint names, well, why don't you put that in, make sure that the interest proportionally goes to the person who pays the least amount of tax? Or split it 50-50. If it's a joint name, you don't have to take it all yourself.
Okay. That's kind of legal, moral.
It is legal. I think it's presumed if it's a joint account to be 50-50, unless you can show that it is something else. P11D, what about that? You're going to be taxed if you receive a P11D on whatever's on that P11D. So if, for example, you get paid, if you had to pay for some purchases for your company, say £1,000, and that goes down in your P11D, then HMRC would tax you for that £1,000, even though you paid it in the first place. So make sure you claim that back as an expense, as well as a P11D benefit in kind income.
Is it only expenses for charity? I mean, if you work in a youth club, or you're organising something in a community sense, and there's an expense involved.
The key is the gift aid. If you're signing something that says it's a gift aid donation, then you can claim it back, and it has a benefit if you're earning tax at 40%, if you're paying tax at 40% or more.
Okay.
So if you don't sign a gift aid declaration, then
so who would you sign
you can't
that?
claim it.
Where does a gift aid certification come from? Do you create one yourself, or because if you're doing a community project or something, you're working with young people, you've created a club or something like that, and you're using some of your own money to finance that. Can you sign a gift aid for that?
No. Well, it depends. I think is the answer. If you're giving money to a charity, somebody asks you to give them money, then they might ask you to sign a declaration in one of three ways. On the telephone, if you give them money, they'll say, "Can I gift aid? Will you gift aid it?" And that classes as a signature.
So children in need or something like
exactly
that. Exactly that. £100 to children in need.
Yeah, they will ask you, do you want to gift aid it? And even just giving, when you look at the forms when you're giving money, they'll ask you, do you gift aid this, or will you gift aid it? And you put a tick in a tick box.
So you take a note of that and note that on your tax return that's what you've done. You don't need the documentation because they don't give you a receipt for that.
I think for your own sake, you should always, whenever you're claiming any expense, make sure you've got some backup information to justify it. HMRC don't always ask, but sometimes they will ask. And if they do ask and you haven't got any backup, then they may take that back from you. So those are two of the ways. The other way is that when you get a sponsorship form from school, quite often there's a little tick box in the corner that says gift aid, and if you tick it, then you are effectively saying to the school they can claim the tax back or a gift aid tax on that. So you put that down in your form. And of course, for many people, if they give regularly to a charity like Tear Fund or their local church, the church or the charity may actually send them out a form for them to sign and send back.
So contributions to your church are also tax deductible.
If you've signed the gift aid form.
This is the key.
That's the key, is some sort of declaration.
I wonder how many people actually do that.
Yeah. And in terms of, you asked the question that if you are setting up your own charity or you setting up a project, then yeah, you can approach HMRC and look to get that club or organisation included under gift aid. In that case, you make the donation to the charity or to your club. The club then goes back to HMRC and says, can we qualify for this? And here are the people who've given us money, and can we have another 25% back from HMRC to fund the charity?
And when if I put in, so if I've given £100 and I put that on my taxes as gift aid, what is the tax that I would save on that? Is it the value of it or a percentage of it?
It depends. If you're paying tax at 20%, you don't save anything more. And the reason you don't save anything more is that the tax on that actually gets paid to the charity.
Right.
But if you're paying tax at 40% or more, then it's assumed that if you imagine you paid £100, and that's after deducting tax of £25, that you've paid £125. But you are allowed to have, and it gets complicated here, 40% tax deduction. So the difference is 20% of that. So you get another £25 back, cash in hand, more or less.
One of the other topics, have we completed on the personal tax savings and?
I think there's some useful
tips.
Ideas for people to start with. I think we can give them some more ideas in the next few weeks. I certainly, if you don't fill in a self-assessment tax return, you have until the 5th of April to claim expenses for the last 4 years.
That's a thing I've often wondered. There was something that I remember, oh gosh, I had an expense and I didn't put it in. Can I put it in the next year?
Yeah, you can go back up to 4 years.
4 years.
Plus this year, so almost 5 years. But thereafter, the rules stop you from claiming, but they don't stop HMRC from going back even 9, 10, 12 years. So it's a little bit unequal.
Yeah. Another topic we were looking at to explore was this about the banking.
Yeah.
Bank accounts and all of that. So just give us an overview of what that's about.
Yeah, Virgin have said that really the free bank accounts are unsustainable and they really stifle competition, and there really needs to be a change in the regulations or in the practice of banks to prevent another mis-selling crisis. I mean, you'll be aware that the mis-selling crises that we've already gone through are PPI, where people were effectively paying for insurance on their loans, payment insurance, but they weren't aware of it, for example. But going on from that, actually, another emerging mis-selling claim, if you like, opportunity is the package bank accounts, where
what's that? What's about a package bank account?
Yeah, for many of us now, we actually pay a fee every month, £5, £6, £10, £20 a month to our bank.
And the charge, the bank charges.
It is, but it's a service, and in return for that, they say they give you perhaps free RAC cover or free health insurance or life insurance or mobile phone insurance. So, and for some people, actually, they have no opportunity but to take that service, the package bank account service, just to get an overdraft. And that seems a little bit inequitable. So you have to pay in addition to your overdraft charges to get the overdraft. So this is the latest sort of mis-selling scandal where people can claim. Potentially, I think the average compensation for people claiming is about £1,700. There are quite a few companies out there who are actually providing a service, just as they did with PPI, to try and get back your money, or if you've been missold.
There are 100 calls you get a week from people saying,
"Don't start me on calls.
press 5 and we will help you."
Yeah. But that's sort of getting off the subject. So Virgin is saying, look, we have this potential for a mis-selling. And the reason is that PwC, as PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accountants, have suggested that free bank accounts are really unsustainable, that customers should instead be asked to pay a fair price in return for reasonable services. And the reality of our lives is that current accounts really aren't free. We think that those free current accounts are free, but they're not, because they're funded through very high overdraft charges for other people, penalty fees, uncompetitive or zero rates on savings. So the bank is robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. Yet we seem to be happy with that. So PwC and Virgin are saying, we've got to stop that. we must have reasonable prices, reasonable charges if you're using services, and equally that means that if you're using an overdraft, you shouldn't get too high penalty charges.
So that I think most people would think that their bank account is free, but I've just come back from Australia, and they get charged. Their bank accounts are not free. Everything is charged for over there.
Yeah, and I think you get charged a reasonable amount for each of the services, as opposed to now where if your account is in credit, you get no charges. But as soon as you step out of line, 1 penny out of line, then you get slammed with very, very large charges, really unreasonable charges.
And they're the people who like in credit cards, who have who have financial challenges, and they step over the line, and then wham, it's a double whammy.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the costs and the interest rates multiply.
Yeah.
So what? And anything else in that?
Yeah, I would suggest just watch out for those package bank accounts claims. There are a few companies that sit out there. We can give you some names later on, but not necessarily on air right now. That'll be advertised.
And it's great that someone like Richard Branson, he's always good at that. He actually puts his head above the parapet and says, this isn't working, whether it was the airline industry or media or whatever. He goes for it, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he in some ways he's a people's champion, isn't he? He does sort of call it as he sees it, and doesn't go with the flow and let us get easily beguiled.
Okay, got something else there?
I think on that, no, but there's another interesting story about from which was in the Observer, saying that perhaps we should be thinking about paying more tax. Perhaps if you want to do that now or after another track.
You're listening to Marlow FM 97.5, the BizBuzz program. This is Dermot Fitzpatrick together with my co-presenter, Wisdom DaCosta. We're coming up to the news at 3 o'clock. And the themes we're covering this afternoon are about corporate tax, personal tax, changes in the reforms in the pension system, and also later on we're going to be looking at inheritance tax, and something to really look forward to that Wisdom has introduced me, something called the Beyonce tax.
It sounds wrong saying I've introduced you to this.
It sounds awfully rude, and I really can't wait until we actually get there. But it's just we've got a minute and a half leading up to the news, so prime us for this exciting aspect of
So not the brothels and the Beyonce tax.
No, not the brothels, Al-Qaeda and the Beyonce tax, but this other one.
Yeah, here's a question for you listeners, and this is something that we're facing in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. Would you pay more council tax for increased services? So that's a question. Would you do that? Now, looking at Jonathan Portas from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, he suggested that we, in order to have better social care and better services, we really ought to be paying more tax. He's saying that the government really trying to pull the wool over our eyes. To quote, "What's on offer is not in the real world. Is not what the Conservatives have promised, which is to cut public spending drastically, maintain service quality, and preserve the NHS as a free at the point of use." That's not my quote, so don't get me into trouble. This was the quote from Jonathan Portas, the director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. So are we having the wool pulled over our eyes? And would you be willing to pay more tax for more services?
Well, I think I would, depending on what the services are. But we'll come back to that. Let's hold that. Very good question until we come back after the news. So I can't wait. There's the question. The question that we've been asking Marlow and the nation is: would they be prepared to pay more tax to have higher quality of services?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? The reality is that funds are very limited. So you have a choice of where to cut spending. Do you want to cut education, cut the NHS, perhaps specific procedures within the NHS, perhaps less police, less defence, or do you want to sort of squeeze the public sector? And obviously, as my wife's a public sector worker, I get a bit irritated by this one. But do you want to squeeze them? Do you want to squeeze the civil servants so that they're into paupers and slaves?
Oh, it's tempting. I like to hear the thought of civil servants squealing.
I think I prefer the thought of government ministers squealing, but there you go. So we have a choice, don't we? There isn't an endless pot, and we have to face the reality as ordinary voters and be really realistic about this. at the moment, the government is running at a deficit. We spend more money than we get in tax income. So, if it was you or I, we'd be declared bankrupt with $1 trillion pounds worth of debt.
Just about. But the bank charges on that would be eye-watering.
So let's be honest. What do you want? Do you want more services or less services? Do you want to maintain your current services, in which case we have to get more tax?
I think we've got to pay more tax.
And where are we going to get that tax from? Is another question. It's a difficult dilemma, isn't it?
Well, first of all, getting those people who are not paying tax, we were saying earlier, to get them to pay tax, those big, because there's millions and millions. I mean, if a small individual people paying tax, it's going to take a long time to get the money. But if those companies who are not paying any tax at all on billions of pounds worth of income,
well, that sounds really like a great idea, which is obviously
Thank you,
David. You've got my vote, Dermot. You've got my vote. Dermot for president or prime minister, as the case may be. But the reality is actually there's very little of the money. Most of the money we get in tax take is actually from income tax, from you and I as ordinary people. So we're recycling our own money to pay for our services. Most of the money we get is not from corporation tax.
it's not.
No, it's from...
Well, it's not because they're not paying enough. That's why it's not enough.
Well, you'd have to double
this might be my last day broadcasting.
You'd have to double the corporation tax rate if you want to make it a bit more equal.
You could get me very angry now.
Okay.
Yeah, but there must be there's hundreds of millions of pounds of tax that could be paid in this country that isn't. But let's stay with the line you're taking.
But from the big picture, hundreds of millions of pounds actually pales into insignificance to the 780 billion pounds that we spend a year. So it's kind of like paddling at the edge of the pool rather than really going for the deep end.
I'm starting to get depressed. Bring me up, wisdom. Wisdom. There's the name. It's in the name. Bring us out of this.
Bring us out of this.
Help us to rise.
Wow.
Help us to rise out of this.
The pressure.
And we'll make you prime minister. What's your suggestion? What do we need to do?
I think we have to look realistically at what we really want and ask the nation, ask the people, what do you want? Do you want? Can we afford to have a free at the point of use NHS, or should we be cutting down on things like benefits tourism, health tourism? Should we be reducing the number of people who have certain operations? These are hard questions. I can't answer them. At the end of each of those answers is a heartbreak, isn't it?
So there's somebody somewhere will say the money should go here or the money should go there, or won't want the cut to happen.
Exactly. But they're things we have to face. We have to face them as individuals and say, okay, yes, of course, we can always talk about efficiencies, but there's only so far you can cut. We have, again, same issue at, this is a bit controversial, same issue at the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. How far can you actually cut before actually you start really hurting people and things actually fall apart? Maybe we have the same issue with this country, that we cannot keep pumping money into the NHS or limiting the money and expecting greater volumes of service. So what do we want, people? What do we want?
I mean, is there other questions to be asked that we're kind of ostracized as we're not actually asking the questions? And how long can this continue? Because none of the politicians want to face up to it, because the truth, what's Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth in A Few Good Men.
Well,
the truth is that it's costing more and more and more, and the money's got to come from somewhere, and it's just not, we're already in debt.
Yep.
So we're already in trillions in debt, and so there's almost like an elephant in the room that isn't being spoken.
This is what Jonathan Portes is saying, and this is what I would reiterate. Yes, we've got to face the honest truth. We can't afford to run the country as it is being run. So we have to sit down. Personally, I think that there's a contract between taxpayers, those who have and those who have not. It's not a one-way ticket. This is just a personal view. So really, as a country, we have to say, who's willing to pay more tax? And those who are using the services, well, what are we giving back to our country? What are we doing in return? It's a tough, mature debate, but it has to be
absolutely. So, I was thinking the government or the country is like a business, is like a family, is like a person's own individual financial circumstances. If you are spending more than you have income, then something has to happen. I mean, the government is in a position they can print more money, but most businesses would go out of business.
Correct.
And most people would lose their home, or would lose, they would have to sell everything. And so we're living beyond our means, are we not? and
It would appear so.
and we're not actually aware of that. It's almost like let's carry on business as usual, but in actual fact, we're living beyond our means. Is that what we're saying here?
I think that's what it looks like to me as a simple accountant. I would say that we need to face some tough decisions, tough questions, be open and honest, and let's make a mature decision as a country together. Let's move forward together, rather than trying to pit one group against another. This minority group against that one, the rich against the poor. I don't think it works that way. We're one nation.
There are some issues that become all-party issues, so that because it's not about this government's time in office, it's for the benefit of the country in the next 20 years. So all parties have to come together and reach some decisions about expenditure on the long term.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe, and this is maybe a controversial thing to say, but I think maybe that this the coalition government, or you may question the results that it's come up with, but they said it could never happen. They said that that this government two parties could never work together for a whole term. Yet it's happened. So maybe we're starting to wise up to a more mature way of doing politics, of running the country. I should say, not politics. I don't like the word politics. Running the country.
And seeing as we've mentioned the coalition, we've mentioned Labour, we haven't mentioned, we mention the Green Party, but there is something coming up, and that really intrigues me. It's about drugs, Brussels, Al-Qaeda and the Beyonce tax, the Green Party plans for Britain. But before we do that, we're going to play a track for
my wife Carol.
For your wife Carol, and this is Life is a Roller Coaster by Ronan Keating. And we've been building up the tension now for this next item. That Wisdom is going to introduce us to. This is something to do with the Green Party, their plans for Britain, and it says here it involves drugs, Brussels, Al-Qaeda, and the Beyonce tax. Enlighten us, Wisdom. This I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Right, I'm going to start.
I've got the censor button in case this gets a bit too risky.
Okay. I'm going to start off right from the outset by saying, if you have a problem with this, blame Matthew Holhouse, political correspondent in the Telegraph. So this is what he writes. So he's talking about the Green Party, who are on the verge of an electoral breakthrough. But when you look at this election, there's a lot of uncertainty about who's going to vote where and how, whether there's going to be effectively a hung parliament. And if there is a hung parliament, who's going to have the deciding vote, which party? And there is some discussion that actually the Green Party, maybe the SNP, or maybe it will be the Lib Dems again, who will actually be that final party who helps either the Conservatives or the Labour Party get into power. So what are these guys saying? Listen to this. They actually have now overtaken the Lib Dems with 11% of support. So they're actually bigger than UKIP, bigger than Lib Dems. That makes the Green Party in membership size the third biggest party in the UK. How's that for a sobering thought? Mm-hmm. So what do they want to do? Mm-hmm. Well, okay, Dermot, this is just for you. I will cut straight to the chase. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of drugs and brothels.
This is just for me with drugs, brothels.
Drugs and brothels.
Okay. And what else? And Al-Qaeda and Beyonce. Okay.
Yep, actually, nothing controversial here.
Nothing controversial. What could possibly go wrong with this piece?
So this is it. The Greens have said that the trade and cultivation of cannabis will be decriminalised under their policy, along with possession of Class A and Class B drugs for personal use. Mm-hmm. I think this one is definitely for you, Dermot. Anti-rave laws will be scrapped, but there will be higher taxes brought in on alcohol and tobacco.
Oh no.
Okay, and all elements, not just some, but all elements of the sex industry will be decriminalised, and prostitutes will no longer be discriminated against in child custody cases. So, where do we go to from there?
Well, I'm hanging on what Beyonce has got to do with this.
Oh, Beyonce, right. Okay, under cultural reforms. Beyonce comes under cultural reforms. So the Greens will explore a tax on superstar performances to support local cultural enterprises. So there's no more freeloading for the superstars coming to the UK.
I didn't know they were freeloading.
I think
they kind of paid for their hotel bills out of the multi-million pound sales of their tickets. So.
Yes and no. Yes, I'm sure. I don't know if they do pay for their hotel bills, but what I do know is that many of the athletes and many people coming to the UK, they're not caught on the UK taxation by they're given a get-out clause. So you come to the UK and the money you earn, you can take out pretty much tax-free.
So this is another. I mean, they can fill Wembley Stadium 10 times over, and the income from sales.
I don't know the full details, but I do know that in the 2012 Olympics they had to change the laws to make sure that people were coming to the UK and their earnings, the big guys, Usain Bolt, I love you by the way, Usain, and people, just in case,
Just in case.
he's bigger than me.
He's listening here.
Exactly, but who isn't bigger?
I really saw the way you quickly were going to your own defence there.
I'm a coward. Yeah. Right, so these sporting stars earn lots of money in the UK. They will come to the UK, but if they're going to be taxed, they'll say, well, we're not coming to the UK. We'll go to Zurich. We'll go to France or some other race meet or some other sporting event rather than coming to the UK. So to try and encourage them, I think they have special tax breaks. Certainly the sporting stars do, and it looks as if the Greens are implying that musicians do as well. I don't think they were specifically aiming at Beyonce.
No, it's just kind of, it's a good catchphrase. It's a good title as well. But I think it's interesting that they are lifting the lid of things that we kind of take for granted as being, whatever it is, the sex trade or drugs, and that it has to be the way we have to have it. And there are other countries like Portugal who have taken a more liberal approach to certain things. In Holland, they've taken a liberal approach to certain things, and it just goes on it works out okay, especially the drugs thing in Portugal.
I think they have a great role to play in terms of challenging the way we think, and we're in a time of change, aren't we? Where the way we think, what we think is right and wrong, is changing. So it is right that they should challenge, and we should examine these issues.
Because some things, drugs, where they're taboo, and they're frowned upon, and people who are using them demonized, and yet we have other addictive aspects of elements like alcohol, cigarettes, that are still readily available, although cigarettes are now behind screens, but they're still available. And of course, we've got a pub outlet, drinks outlet on every street, and in the high street, etc. And those things are permissible, and other things are not. So it's maybe not a bad idea to actually lift the lid and have a debate and say, either this is okay or this is okay, and how can we do this differently? Because the war on drugs hasn't actually worked, has it? They haven't killed off the use of drugs on the street, the sale of drugs on the street. It just hasn't worked.
And there could be lots of reasons why it hasn't worked. It could be a hearts and minds issue that we haven't really addressed those key issues. And other people would point to poverty, deprivation, and the factors that cause depression or addiction. So yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? But yes, let's have the debate.
Let's have the debate. Yeah.
But you can love this one. On the Green Plan's inheritance tax to prevent the accumulation of wealth and power by the privileged class will no longer be quite the same way. That people are going to be taxed on presents. Not just the tax on what they leave behind when they finally go to meet their maker. They'll be taxed on what you give now.
They will be taxed on.
So gifts made while the giver is still alive will be taxed, and that raises the prospect that there'll be levies on cars, jewellery, furniture, or anything else given by parents to their children.
But isn't there a limit anyway on that? Is there not? An X £1,000 a year? Or
I think it relates to financial issues, and within the life. I think within the 7 year, you're right. There is that rule, but it looks as if they're might extend this even further. I don't think there's anything further being discussed other than they want to tax giving. I say that controversially, of course, just because we're talking about drugs and brothels and so forth.
And so, in the few minutes we've got left, we've got this last one. Dad is getting married again, and we are worried she will end up with our inheritance. Should we persuade him to get a prenup?
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue that it's really
it has to do with tax.
I suppose,
or it has not to do with tax, but inheritance, doesn't it? Yeah,
it's certainly inheritance.
Who gets what?
Yeah. It's a tough one, isn't it? This is more of a social issue, isn't it? 1 in 3 marriages nowadays end in divorce, and so, like myself, you have a wonderful wife, Carol, but people come with lives they've lived previously. So you end up with you have children, your partner has children, and what would happen if, for example, if the man dies, then potentially all of his, well, not all of his assets under inheritance law would go to the wife. That means that then if she passed away, everything that you lived for and created would go to your wife, and then if she passes away, go to her children. So it raises the issue that prenups, perhaps, and things like that ought to be looked at by children of the father. Otherwise, their assets will be lost to their generation. So how can we deal with that? Well, prenup is one way. Another way would be to look at making a will, very important. Insuring your house, taking out some life insurance policy. There's lots of packages of ideas which you can pull together to try and achieve a solution so that all the children are taken care of exactly, and proportionately or equally. Again, another complicated situation.
I was asking a solicitor recently how many people actually had taken out a will, and the percentage wasn't very high.
Yep.
It's amazing that something of such importance can be left in the chance.
Well, we like to leave those questions, those big questions of death and passing away, don't we?
Yeah. Wisdom, we've come to the end of the program. My goodness, it's with a minute to go. It's been a real great pleasure.
It's been great to be on.
It's been really fun, and I hope you're going to come back and co-host with me again in 2 weeks' time.
Absolutely, it'll be a pleasure.
Let's see what we can bring up between now and then that's nice and kind of controversial and interesting, because I think that's the point, is bringing things that are perhaps not spoken about normally and bringing them out and saying, is this something that really we need to shine the light on it.
Yeah, let's add value to people.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for listening. It's been a great pleasure. This is Dermot Fitzpatrick signing out. Look forward to being back with you again here on BizBuzz, Marlow FM 97.5 in 2 weeks' time.